Hello everyone, I'm Maximilian Skrzypczak from Układ Sił, Balance of Power. Today we're being hosted at the French Institute for International Affairs, or IFRI, and our guest who is hosting us is Léo Péria-Peigné, French researcher on defense industry, on conventional and unconventional warfare, as well as doing some research on Turkey and Afghanistan. Welcome.
Feel welcome here.
Thank you. Today we'll talk a little bit about Africa, but also about the Middle East, and we'll try to link that to French and European policy. Starting from Africa, Léo, in Poland, the French presence in Africa, and honestly, African continent in general, is rather scarcely covered in the media. So if you could tell us generally, what are French interests in Africa beyond just symbolic legacy presence?
The point is that for the last 5 years now, the French presence in Africa has been shrinking, both willingly and unwillingly, because French forces have been expelled from Mali, from Burkina Faso, from Niger. And now it seems that the dynamic is so strong that even willingly we are reducing our presence in the other countries with which we still have very good relation, but still like Ivory Coast, Senegal, Gabon, we are slowly shrinking our presence, reducing the number of soldiers, reducing the amount of hardware which is stored there, because it seems that France is going on a shift toward eastern flank. And I think the best symbols of this is that there has never been that many French soldiers deployed within Europe outside of France, and for the first time it's bigger than the number of French soldiers deployed in Africa, and for the first time it was in 2023, so 2 years ago, and I think that this dynamic is only getting bigger with time.
Right, so there are the factors that were imposed on you, that you unwillingly had to withdraw from certain countries. And there's the pivot towards the NATO eastern flank that's more willingly performed. Now, the question is, if you make this shift, aren't you making more room for Russia to come and embolden its grip on Africa? Therefore, on one hand, you're countering it in Eastern Europe, but then you're allowing it to gain perhaps indirect leverage on Europe, let's say to facilitate mass immigration from Africa.
That's a very good topic, and we've seen in Poland, in Finland, that mass migration was clearly a tool within Russian and Belarusian hands. But still, I think that the point is that we were very involved in mainly Sahel, in Sahelian Africa, and now we can't stay there no more. So even if this whole dynamic has been instrumentalized by Russia to cultivate anger toward France in these countries, the initial substract was that our presence there was very intensive and drew a lot of military means that now I needed elsewhere in a theater of operation that might be seen as a bit more prioritary than Africa. Currently, I think that in most French citizens' mind, the Russian threat is bigger than what the Islamic and terrorist groups' threat has been in the 2010s, in the last 2010s. And this shift is also seen in politics, so it might be of a longer and durable dynamic for the coming years.
I understand. So when it comes to the long-term perspective, we know that Africa is growing demographically at an astonishing pace. Some say that in the second half of this century, it will account for half of world population. And at the same time, we have climate change. It's undeniable. And a lot of countries, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, might become unlivable, which of course poses the question of the possibility of huge influx of people and immigration pressure on the European southern border. Do you have a view how Europe should prepare itself for that threat?
There is a very good study that came out several years ago comparing how much money we put in keeping out some immigration flux and the money we put in integrating those who are already here. And it seems that the money that we are putting in trying to protect ourselves because we actually cannot protect it fully is much more important than the money that we're putting in integrating them. At the same time, and I know it's not perfect, but at least it's the only short and medium-term solution we have. Europe is an aging continent, and France is. Poland, regarding its demographics, it's even worse. So, if the solution is keeping everybody outside, it will be very hard. At the same time, I understand perfectly the consideration about cultural change and all those things. It is absolutely not the topics of my research, so I will not go that far on this because I do not master these topics. But the point is that we have to think on, will we keep it better by integrating people and keeping a constant number of citizens, or by getting a very quickly shrinking number of citizens and putting a lot of money to keep people out? That's a dilemma I do not have an answer to give.
I understand. So switching more to topics you're more familiar with, when you were talking about the pivot from Africa towards Eastern flank, this is with regard to the force deployment, but does the French arms industry pivots as well from, let's say, unconventional warfare tools like, jeeps and quads, etc., towards tanks and heavy aircraft? Is that the case or not necessarily?
One has to understand that French arms industry is mainly linked to what the French armed forces want. It's as simple as that. In Germany, it's different. The arms industry, at least in the ground arm sector, is more about what will be popular on the market outside Germany, and German armed force will buy it anyway. In France, it's the other way. What does the French armed forces want? And then, if it works on the global market, cool. But that's not the point. And that specificity is now reaching its limits because, as you said, we've been involved for the last 30 years in OPEX, Operation Exterior, so expeditionary operations in Africa, in the East, in Afghanistan, etc., which needed very specific kind of armament. Mine-resistant, ambush-protected vehicle. I think the French industry understood it perfectly and pushed a lot in this direction. But now, it's seen as maybe outdated, outmoded, out-fashioned, and it needs a shift. Still, regarding air and naval military means, we are still pretty involved in high-intensity oriented hardware. But on the ground forces means, we will really need a shift, which already happened actually when you look at least Caesar production, ammunition production. But the shift between the exterior operations and the high-intensity warfare against Russia or anyway, I think it's mostly a shift that must happen in the head of the military and in the politics, and after the industry will follow, actually, because that's how they work. They follow the orders of the armed forces.
Thank you for this characterization. So we covered the general picture when it comes to Africa. Now I would like to switch a bit to the Middle East. For the last 2 years, at least since the October 2023, we've witnessed a lot of turmoil in the region. I know you specialize in Turkey, in its armaments, and its geopolitical position. Many see Turkey as one of the main winners in the past 2 years, partly because of the fall of the Assad regime and the, in general, pro-Russian new government of Syria. Would you agree with the statement that Turkey has won a lot?
What is very interesting with Turkey is that they are playing on a game that is everything or nothing, because the economical situation is really bad, and I've seen it getting worse and worse through the last 10 years now. But still, at the same time, they achieved to have a very smart foreign policy that put them as an almost autonomous actors. They are playing with Ukraine, they are playing with Russia, and they are still in talk with all the parts. What happened in Syria was maybe not made by Turkey, but of course it helped them. And now they are still, the point is that French and Turkish relations are not that good because we are allied with other countries such as Greece, Cyprus, and Armenia. With all of the three, we have very strong relations. But the point is that Turkey is becoming a key player even in Europe because they have, among others, they have a very strong defense industry on things that we do not produce that much in Europe anymore, especially explosive material, stuff like that. And when you look at the map, almost everybody in Europe is working with Turkey. Poland is doing, Italy is doing, Spain is doing, Britain is doing, and France is a bit the only one in the major Western European countries that is completely blocked in its relation with Turkey, which I think is a limit in the future of European autonomy, because I think that we will need Turkey and its defense industry and its army, because it's still the second biggest in NATO, to reinforce this European pillar of NATO facing the Russian threat.
I understand, but your solution would be that it's the Turkey's, like the ball for change is on the Turkish side, and they should do something to make France more willing to cooperate with them, or maybe it's the other way around. France should shift its mentality with vis-a-vis the new order.
That's a very good question. I think it will be a bit of both, because in this kind of new context, we both need to do steps toward the others. We need to maybe balance a bit our relations between Greece and Turkey, because we can't abandon our relations with Greece, which is very important, but we cannot make this relation exclusive. And we have to work with Turkey because Turkey, on a strategic point of view regarding whole Europe and Mediterranean, is becoming much more important than Greece is. And it has much more means, much more capabilities, much more ambition also, because the Greek ambition is mainly to protect itself against Turkey, while Turkey has at least an idea of region strategy and an ambition. At least it has an ambition that goes farther than only its conflict with Greece. So, and as I said, as everybody is working with Turkey, while we are only working with Greece, Cyprus, and Armenia, which are interesting partners, but also limited partners. So if we want to stay in this European game and be meaningful actors within this game, I think we will have to find a balance between these two. But Turkey, for itself, will also have to make some, steps, progress toward us in many different ways, such as education, culture, military, security, armament, to find a balance that will not humiliate any partners.
But on the grand strategic level, how exactly would you say Europe should approach Turkish vision in the Middle East? If you could just define, what does exactly Turkey want in the region? Does it aim at regional hegemony, or just protecting its immediate interests? Because I guess this kind of influence how we should approach Ankara's policy, right?
15 years ago, the Turkish agenda was pretty clear. It was about using its position of the most successful Middle East country, Muslim country, to lead a new generation of Arab republics in the Arab Spring. Okay, that strategy completely failed. It antagonized Turkey a lot, especially against the Gulf, against Egypt, against many countries. So now I think that Turkey has a much more pragmatic approach. It needs to stabilize itself, to protect its borders. It's a bit coming back to what was before Erdogan. But still, they are seeing themselves as more integrated in this region, as before 2000, it was only focused on Europe and Western countries. Now it's a bit more balanced, which is logical, because they are mainly in Middle East, actually, when you look at the map. And what is exactly their goal for now? I think it's having a no-problem policy, but an actual one, because that was the policy that was attempted 15 years ago, and it was the zero problem with the neighbors, and it ended with zero neighbors without problems. So I think it taught the Turkish diplomacy to be quieter, more pragmatic, but also much more involved still in this region.
I understand. One French diplomat wouldn't agree with you. I'm talking about Jacques Oron, the previous ambassador of France to Israel, to the UN, and to the US. He's very active on Twitter, and every week he essentially tweets something about how Turkey and Israel are on a crash course with each other because, in his view, because of the weakening of the Shia network of Iran and reinforced security of Israel, at least vis-a-vis Iran, and the better Turkey position, both will eventually clash in the Middle East. It kind of goes contrary to what you're saying. How would you respond?
I think so far Syria has not been a frontal opposition battlefield between these two. It might be in the future, and I wouldn't, as this region is pretty unpredictable, I wouldn't risk myself to do any futuristic visions. But still, the Turkish and Israeli relationships have been very specific. Turkey was the first Muslim country to recognize the existence of Israel. They have very interesting commercial and economical relations, especially in the field of water, because Turkey was for a long time sending a lot of drinkable water to Israel. So I don't think Turkey, outside some rhetorical posture, is really interested in fighting Israel, as some people could say. I think they will find modus vivendi, again, that find balance. I don't think Turkey wants to influence the whole Syria, especially it doesn't have the means, because the current power in Damas is not a creature of Turkey. It's a half autonomous Islamic power, and Turkey supports others groups that still got power in Syria. Israel, supporting the Druze community, is maybe creating its own, not puppets, but instruments within the country. But as none of them have the central power for now, as may change pretty quickly as we saw it in the last 6 months, I would still be very careful on this antagonistic view of their relations.
I understand. And now when it comes to Turkey, many people in Europe, particularly in Poland, like to say that NATO eastern flank should be defined not only as Central Europe, but it should be widened. So we should talk about the great axis from Scandinavia, coming through Central Europe up to the Turkey presence in the Black Sea. Now the question is, how do you see the possibility of any kind of Turkish involvement in containing Russia from the point of NATO eastern flank? Do you see it only as maybe arms sales or land presence or just taking care of maritime issues?
What's very interesting is that Turkey is actually the last NATO country to have actually shot down a Russian plane in combat situation. And in the same time, they are talking with Russia. They are partly dependent on, especially on energetic aspects of the Russian trade. But in the same time, they are still supporting Ukraine pretty strongly. They ensure that the grain deal was respected. And more recently, they are very involved in this Crimean Tatar community issues. So their game is not the one of a fully pledged NATO member, because they will always, actually everybody is doing, considering their own interest before the ones of NATO. But who can actually blame them? Everybody is doing the same, as it seems, especially looking at their very specific geographical position. But in the same time, it seems that the Turkish defense industry is more and more involved within Europe. They sold TB2 to a lot of people, or a lot of countries in Europe, including Poland. They are selling interesting vehicles, and they got a very strong fabric contract in Romania. There is this UAV cooperation with Italy and Spain, which Spain also sold the design of their new aircraft carrier. So this is a much more balanced relationship that is now compared to what it was in the 90s, in the 80s maybe. And I think that's what the Turks wanted when they initiated this autonomization from NATO policy right after the operation on Cyprus. Now they achieved it. Can they hold it regarding their economical situation? I think that if they can find this compromise between their own interests that they feel have not been well defended by NATO in the past, especially regarding Kurds, regarding Libya, regarding Syria, etc., etc., I think they will still be a key player on our global posture regarding Russia. Regarding that, Turkey has no real friendship with Russia. It's more a pragmatic approach that might change, and it will have to be linked deeply on with the economical situation of Turkey and the political one, because it seems that President Erdogan cannot last longer another term. Should not, if you read the constitution, but there are still some tools. And these two aspects, economical and political, will, I guess, drive most of the Turkish political attitude in the coming years.
I understand. And what's your overall assessment of the Turkish military? Is it capable enough for the challenges?
The point is that they have mass. They have willing to fight population, a bit like Finland. Like when you ask the Finns, would you fight if even without hope to win? You have 78% of the population that say yes. So regarding high-intensity warfare possibilities, that's already a very big advantage that most countries in Europe do not have. So that's it. Now, they still have limitations, especially regarding Air Force, because the Air Force really suffered from the purges after the coup in 2016. That's something that is very slowly improving, but it will take time, especially as Turkey lost its place in the F-35 programs and seems to have negotiated its way to F-16 Viper kits, but it will still have to be confirmed. On the ground forces, the point is that Turkey does not have any ground borders with Russia, so it's a help. And in the same time, the Turkish naval power is still very consequent, especially regarding the losses of the Russian Black Sea. So when you look at army after army, I think that they still have a potential that is, for now, crucial for the European pillar of NATO if fighting Russia becomes something.
Right. To zoom out a little bit and focusing on the Middle East as such, should France still be somehow involved in the Middle East, not only when it comes to just very particular cases like sending armaments here and there, but as a power that would try to shape how the Middle Eastern affairs look like? Just from the first French perspective.
I see our president doing a lot of things, but I don't think he's still trying to shape anything, honestly. Apart maybe in Lebanon, which is very specific and got specific ties. But at the same time, we cannot fight against this global optimization process within the Arabic world, especially like for decades, we relied on United Emirates, on Saudi Arabia to purchase our weapons and help our defense industry to survive, actually, because without these orders, some parts of our defense industry would have been killed or would have died. But now they want offsets. They are doing some hedging because they are working with Russia, they are working with India, with Pakistan, and they are getting more full-grown geopolitical actors than they were before. And on that, we have very limited grasp. So I think that it's not the same as the movement within Africa, because from there, I think that without the events in Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Chad, maybe the situation would be different. But the point is that these countries are affirming themselves on the international stage, so we have to comply with that. And at the same time, we are still committed. We still have a very big base in the United Emirates. We still have pretty good relations with Saudi Arabia. Troops are involved in Iraq and somehow in Syria in the coalition against ISIS and its remnants. So France is not absent from this part of the world, but it will. I don't think it has any means to shape it, and I don't think that's what is wanted currently.
Right, so the recent moves of President Macron, I mean, we won't get into details, but let's say his recent activity, let's say, on the Israel-Palestine conflict, and also his talks with the Arab League, etc. You would say it's probably more on the symbolic side than something practical.
The point is that on this we cannot do nothing because France still considers itself as a great power, so we have to... Doing nothing would be harshly criticized, more than trying.
By whom?
By a lot of people, including within France.
Right.
So...
You mean by those who still see that France is a great power?
No, by those who see what is happening in Gaza, for now.
Right.
Mainly. Those who see France as a great power are different, I think. But on these topics, I think that at least trying, even if our way to influence Israel are really limited compared to the US or even Germany, but doing nothing would be more criticized than at least trying.
Right. Thank you very much for the comprehensive interview. I hope our viewers enjoy it, and well, I hope we can cooperate further to, shape the strategic culture on both sides of European Union. Thank you very much.